Hello, dear listener. Today I'm talking to Björn Christian Rødal, and I think I'm pronouncing it right. I'm just pronouncing it the Dutch way.
Now you're pronouncing it fine.
Yeah, and we met at an Erkebrand event a few years ago, a congress, so to speak. And at the time, I was part of Erkebrand, and Bjorn, I'll call you Bjorn for ease sake, was part of Alliansen. And at the time, we wanted to do a podcast discussion, just general Dutch, Norwegian politics, nationalist politics, and so on. But it never materialized. Now we're a few years further ahead, and we finally got a chance to do the podcast. But now neither of us is really in an organization anymore. But still, I think it's an interesting chance to give listeners an insight into Norwegian politics, Norwegian nationalism, the Norwegian landscape. So maybe begin with telling about Alliansen, the national scene in Norway, the political parties, just the general culture there, maybe.
Okay, I can do that. It's how to say. It's been quite the development. It's been quite a ride over the last few years. Like you mentioned, I started this journey into politics when I joined. It was right after the election, the Trump election in back in 2016. That's when I got active in politics, and at the time there was a new party gathering signatures to become established in Norway. And they were riding on the wave of first the Brexit and then later the Trump victory as a populist, nationalist, conservative surge. You could say that a breakthrough that happened at that time. So being following politics actively and participating in online discussions and generally being interested in politics and what's going on in society and philosophy and these things for many years since I was a young kid really. I jumped on the opportunity, you could say. Like I jumped in with both feet and kind of like not thinking too much about it. I thought I saw an opportunity and I grabbed it. So the whole story actually it started late one evening. Well, not too late, but late in the afternoon, early evening. Some guys, they show up on my door and they're collecting signatures for this to start this new party, and I immediately understand what it is about. Like these they are. And they are against the EU. They want to take Norway out of this treaty we have with the EU, and they give me the standard lines what it's about. And a couple of days later, and that was the Alliance. That was the formation of the party. And a couple of days later, I'm helping collecting signatures myself. Mm-hmm. So that was like my introduction into it and how I got involved into politics, and that quickly escalated.
It's quite similar kind of. I started a little bit before you. Then I think I got involved or interested in these sorts of politics in 2015 or so with the refugee crisis, and I started looking around. And I first went to look with Pegida and so on, and that wasn't really for me. So I found this new organization, Erkebrand, at the time, and I kind of did the same as you. I kind of just jumped in without thinking, using my real name, using my real face, and so on.
Absolutely. And I didn't see any reason why I shouldn't do that. I mean, I've never been one to hide my opinions from anyone, and I never been afraid of my opinions. Never been ashamed of what I think is correct and what is right. And I think everyone needs to stand up for what they believe in. If not, they're destined to be ruled by those that are, how to say, more aggressive or more brazen or them themselves. But anyway, I digress a little bit. So no, yeah. So at the time, Alliansen was like the only. It was like the only, how to say,
nationalist group.
yeah, it was the only nationalist alternative. Like that was a really conservative, and well, maybe conservative is not the right word, but you know, more nationalist, traditionalist oriented.
Yeah, yeah.
At the time, fake conservatives that I used to be. I was actually, when I was younger, when I studied, I used to be a member of the Conservative Party in Norway. But those guys are a bunch of, either they're toothless or they're a bunch of globalists. So it's like they're practically useless if you want to have a more traditionalist, nationalist agenda going against yeah, exactly. So any at the time it was like it was young, it was fresh. Back in 2016, we got the party established by the skin of our teeth just in time, right? So we could join the 2017 election, because Norway has the parliamentary election 1 year after the American presidential election. So in 2016, and then we had national parliamentary elections in Norway in 2017, and so I helped them get enough signatures. Crew of people going around collecting the signatures. You need 5,000 to establish a new party, and everything was very young, fresh, exciting, and you know, it felt like the world was like lying, you know, before your feet. And
I really,
and
yeah, very similar experience. I had the same at the time with the Dutch elections were also in 2017, and we were all like, oh, Wilders going to win a huge majority, and Le Pen is going to win, and we're just going to turn this whole thing around. But yeah, well.
And it had a very promising start. And it escalated very quickly for me. Like I rose, I got very quickly a position in the leadership of the party, and I ended up becoming like vice president. You could compare it to that of the organization, and it was very like promising in the beginning, and they did a lot of things right. But what was important and of course at the time it seemed like the really the best option that was out there, and I felt like I had the opportunity to influence this and make sure that this is going to be a serious alternative to the established parties. But what belongs to the story, which is very important here, is that the leader of the party, he wanted to have, or he claimed that in the beginning, for simplicity, he wanted to have, or not wanted to have, he de facto, in fact, he had absolute, how to say, final decision, the final word in any decision of the party, be it what you were going to use the funds, what the party is going to use the funds for, the policy, and all these things. And in the beginning, it made sense when we were like gathering collecting the signatures, and then you had to put up a list. You know, people have to be on the ballot for every circuit, every you know electoral district. And so for sake of and so on, we just did it like that. But once you could say the usefulness of that policy was spent, he didn't want to let anyone get any real influence into the party of how the future and how it should be run and so on. And he claimed that it was to protect the party from, you know, infiltration or from becoming, I don't know, too soft or too this or too that. But in reality, what it ended up was that it more and more deteriorated into a one-man show, and the more serious elements that had attached themselves to the party, of course, they were not interested in becoming a part of just a
Sorry, your audio is dropping. Can you just repeat that, because your audio is breaking up a bit?
Okay. No. Anyway, no. So what I'm saying is my point is that in the beginning it looked very promising, but over time, when we wanted to start building a more serious party organization, the leader of the party, he resisted the necessary change, because that means you need to delegate that decision-making power to build new bodies of the party and so on and so forth. But he insisted in having the last say in absolutely everything going on in the organization.
But you said to protect against infiltration, and the interesting thing here in the Netherlands is we have two nationalist sort of parties, more like liberal populist parties. The PVV of Geert Wilders and Forum for Democracy of Baudet. And one has that complete authoritarian top-down leadership with Wilders, and he's so far been able to keep sort of a coherent party together. Whereas Baudet, who has tried to keep a more open party, has actually suffered from infiltration and undermining from his own party.
Correct.
So it is a legitimate argument sometimes.
Yeah, and it is. I'm not saying that it isn't. And Geert Wilders, of course, is an excellent example of when and where it can be successful. But it heavily depends on the leader of that one individual, and that person is capable. Is a very competent and a very capable leader, of course. And I would have gone along with it if the leader was, had that type of organist skill of being an organizer and that competence, which unfortunately was not the case.
Right. So what's the status with Alliance now then?
Well, the whole as a political project, it has completely imploded, and it's stagnated and has receded. But it doesn't mean that the whole project was worthless. It didn't. A lot of good things have come out of it. Mm-hmm. So you could say that it was a very like a flash of light. You could say like a lightning, like that was shining very bright for a very short period of time, that attracted a lot of people, a lot of good people. And I'm very happy I participated in this, because I got dozens of new friends, some of the strongest friendships that I have right now, and is getting stronger and stronger over the last 3-4 years, is exactly it comes from participating here. So even if like the organization itself now is starting to, well, it already has stagnated and imploded, even though that is the case, it was a whole milieu, a whole group of a network of people who came together, and that is very precious. The gathering of a lot of young, intelligent, particularly young men.
Yeah, it's interesting because this also again mirrors my experience at Erkebrand, where that project has maybe not quite imploded, but it's definitely lost a lot of its influence that it had a few years ago. And it was indeed for a little while, it was very, very rapidly growing, attracting a lot of competent people. And I have the same experience. I still have most of my best friends and a lot of my personal network from being involved in nationalist politics, or meta-politics in this case, because we didn't form a party. We formed sort of a think tank. So similar experience. And I think this reflects sort of a zeitgeist throughout Europe, where there's all these little groups popping up, forming bands of especially young men, as you say, especially highly educated young men. I think we all went to university, or most of us.
Yes.
And yes. So yeah, it's maybe like I would compare it to like when the communists in the 1830s and 1840s were like building up to becoming an actual movement before Marx even, and even after Marx. For about a century, they were an intellectual movement, mostly preoccupied with intellectual debates, partisan infighting, writing, developing doctrine. So I think we're kind of like in a similar position there, where there's a spark sort of in the mind of people, especially the younger generations. The zeitgeist is changing, but we're still marginal, and the establishment is very much against us. We have a long way ahead.
And it's an interesting comparison that you made there. That's a very interesting comparison. There's one thing they had going for them, that might not be the same for us. And I think that back then, as a movement, like you mentioned, the communist movement back then, they had time in a way on their side, whereas we don't have time on our side in the same manner. I'm not saying that thing that we have to things have to change like right now, but they certainly, we have a time window that is closing.
Definitely.
Yeah. So that makes it a bit more. I think that's why you see a more desperation on our part, whereas they had more of an optimism. Whereas as our movement is gearing more towards bunkering down for the long winter.
But there's also the pessimism that our people have isn't unique to our movement. There's a general sort of cultural pessimism throughout the West in general.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I read this interesting study recently that says both the left and the right have a very apocalyptic vision of the future at the moment. One mainly because of migration, and the other mainly because of climate change. Although I think it's more nuanced, and there's far more in there, and there's a more spiritual underlying idea, because we have this nihilistic culture that doesn't have anything to offer, and it's only materialist and so on. But the difference also with the communists is they, in the 19th century was, of course, a period of constant technological progress, of growth. You had the Belle Epoque. It was a very positive and optimistic time in arts and so on. And also, their rhetoric is easier. It's easier to be a leftist than a rightist, because as a leftist, you can say, I'm promoting equality. I'm here to give you things. I'm here to give you, I'm here to tear down those who oppress you. Well, if you're a rightist, what you're telling people is nature is harsh. Might makes right. There is no such thing as a free lunch. You don't have things to give to people, or maybe lies to sell them, but your rhetoric is harsh. That doesn't attract people.
Well, certainly it's easier to sell that message in a very in a democratic where you have a democratic context where you have one man or one woman and one man, one vote, kind of like mass emancipation. So certainly, I think the populist answer to a rightist will and always will be to appeal then to counter all of that is of course is nationalism and tribalism. And that's kind of like, this is interesting. I've been reading reading a bit of Mencius Moldbug. Over the last year and a half. It's interesting. I actually want to have something we could discuss. There's some very interesting new writers out there. But anyway, so the analysis is that on the right you have more of the elite aristocratic sense of the right, being like in the pre-French Revolution, right, but right side. But then you also have the commoner right, the populist right, which manifests itself, in the people of a nation, which then is like nationalistic populism. And I think it's important that there should be an alliance or an alignment between the elitist right-wing views have to align themselves with the populists, because especially in a democratic nation.
Yeah.
Whereas the fault, I think, has been is that the nationalist populism has very often been geared towards even the right-wing elites. So I think there has to be some negotiation, some sort of a bargain has to be struck on the right between the factions on the right, which represents two.
The elite and the people. There was an interesting event here a few months ago in the Netherlands, which was organized by a Catholic organization, a Catholic sort of like sedevacantist, semi-sedevacantist organization, and they used very much populist rhetoric, but they also appealed to like deeper philosophical ideas. but they had 6 speakers at this event, and about half were like deep right, reactionary, philosophical thinkers. There was one who talked about Plato's idea of the inequality of man and so on, the caste system of Plato. There was one who talked about the excellence of spirituality and God and so on, and hierarchy. And then there were these populists also who talked about the euro being bad and talked about Islamification is an issue and so on. The sort of less interesting populist rhetoric you hear a lot.
Correct.
So it was an interesting event in that sense. So I think that's sort of what you're getting at, right? These sorts of
that correct. That's what I'm getting at. We and that's the direction we need to move towards. Absolutely. So in that sense, you will get a nationalistic oriented elite, but at the same time, we don't go too far in the populist sense, because the dangers of that populism is that it can blossom both in communism and in nationalism. But so that's why I think it's very important that we have to appeal, we have to take into account, we have to respect the role that populism is playing in this. But at the same time, it has to be in accordance with traditional.
So my question was, you said we need to find a way to work with the populists, but isn't the issue there that the populists constantly try to keep us out, that they're more preoccupied with fighting reactionaries, nationalists, and so on, than even fighting the left most of the time?
Right. I know. No, but I think we can find common ground, and the common ground, of course, is nationalism, where I think the elites, they have to obviously they would have to come up to it's like a give and take. In any negotiation, there's a give and take, and I think we can find common ground in the idea of the nation and nationalism, and that we do different function, and we respect each other, that we're both important for the different groups of the nation, have to cooperate for the nation to survive and for the nation to thrive, and that we honor each other and respect each other, even though we have different stations, we have different there are different places in the hierarchy. At the same time, we need to honor and pay respect to one another. So it's the whole notion of this class warfare. I think
you would want to unite people into a Volksgemeinschaft. The thing is, there are plenty of points where we have an agreement on. First, we all oppose the sort of cultural Marxist things the left are doing. Even the more liberal right doesn't like the transsexual stuff and the homosexual indoctrination in schools. They don't like the economic redistribution that is implied in the environmental stuff. So there's and they don't like mass migration. So there's plenty of things that we sort of agree on, but they still see us as more of an enemy than the left. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that they sort of share a moral system more with the left than the real right, because they are egalitarians.
Yes, but again, I think the way to compensate for that, or even that, is to focus, like I said, is to find common ground in nationalism, and the focus on what is a nation, and that we have a common destiny that ties us together, and these you can explain. You don't even have to use very lofty words. You could use very everyday kind of examples, and I think that this is where you could win the democratic argument. Just like you said, the communists and the socialists back in the 1800s, they had a very easy message to sell. But if we find the right right way of communicating, not arguments, but just the right way of communication, because I think this is something we've been suffering from, at least the old right's been suffering from, is to focus on namely these things that that give people, which is close to your home, close to your heart, and you communicate that. So we do have a narrative that is easy to sell. We just have to get better at.
Well, you'd think
promoting that.
Let's Not Go Extinct would be an easy message to sell, but apparently it's not. And the thing is, maybe we could convince these people, and I had this argument with my father a while back.
So I think the question is, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
Yeah.
I think the question is, can we or can we not win politically in a democratic?
Not until we have something to offer, I think. That's what my father said to me,
exactly.
is like, maybe you have all the right arguments, maybe you're morally correct, but as long as you don't have anything to offer in a realpolitik power play sense, why would anyone listen to you? I mean, the populists have political parties, they have an electorate, they have some social influence. Nationalists have arguments, and they have maybe very good books and very good websites, but we don't have numbers, we don't have electoral influence, we don't have money, so...
No. Correct. Yeah. And that's the thing I think is also holding us back, is that we are lacking these things. But there's a silver lining to it. And that is that we can't be complacent. People like us who have, literally have our skin in the game, because we're out there with our faces and our names, and we have taken a moral stance, and people who share our ideas and values, we have to make it ourselves, which means that we won't grow like the left has grown fat and complacent on their laurels, so to speak. That's why they've become so incompetent. Whereas I think we are under extreme stress, which could, and I hope it will, benefit us in the long term. So that's why
we've got much better human capital. We've got seriously more competent people than the left, but we are not really capable of deploying them, and many people are too afraid to employ their talent.
Yes, of course. A lot of people are afraid, and we're also lacking, like I said,
money.
Like money comes down to. So I think, like, if you have the money to do it, and you have a competent leadership, definitely we have a message to sell that would sell in a democratic system. So I think that is possible, but it's just comes down to. But it pushes us to get those resources. So if we won't get a sponsor from someone, like someone like Trump was able to pay for his own campaign. So, and he had a message to sell. So if we won't get a backer who shares our values, then we just have to
it's not even like
our own.
I think it's a bit of a vain hope to hope for a millionaire or something to come and finance us. But one thing that every listener could do is just donate occasionally to smaller organizations. But I think we're getting a little bit too deep into this discussion, because we were supposed to discuss more about Norway. So
I know we digressed a little bit.
Yeah, we got a bit off track. But so why don't you tell the audience about the political landscape in Norway? Is it a bit of a conservative country? What political parties are dominant historically? What sort of potential shifts do you see in the voting demographics? And what sort of things used to be on the agenda and have completely gone off, and what things are now on the agenda, that sort of thing?
Compared to a lot of other Western European countries, Norway has a more overall socially conservative, than, for example, a country like Sweden, for example. Whereas Denmark is even more socially conservative than Norway again. So Norway is like right in between Denmark, and we're closer to Denmark than Sweden by far. So this is interesting. I think we have seen in the general, if you look at the discourse, the movement of the discussion in the country has definitely moved in a more socially more nationalist way. Not far enough by a long shot, but it's on that trend. However, those people that are in government are way more the leadership of the current government and the governing parties in our government. We have a coalition government right now, which consists of the Conservative Party and the Progressivist Party. It used to, they just went out of government, which is interesting. We can talk about that a little bit. But until recently, we had a coalition government which consisted of the Progressive
and the Progressive
populist. Yeah. Well, they call themselves the Progressivist Party, but they're not. They're the least progressive in some ways than compared to real, left-wing progressive parties. What it is, it's more like a liberal populist. It's a liberal populist, right liberal populist party who used to be the most the progressive party, also known as the Fremskrittspartiet. They just stepped out of the government, but currently they are the most strict when it comes to immigration, and this is like the only issue that really has gathered a lot of like electoral base to them. On all the other issues, they are as liberal as you could imagine. Like, they're not truly a conservative party, but they're more of a liberal populist, stop the mass immigration.
Or we have the same.
Or at least like slow it down. It's like a more soft variation of maybe Geert Wilders, a more soft. It's a little bit similar to the Sweden Democrats, a bit softer than the Sweden Democrats.
Even softer.
But at least in some ways they're a bit softer than the Sweden Democrats. But they're close to Sweden Democrats. But they have shared. They've been in the cabinet. They've been a part of the government, Norwegian government, for the last. Let's see, they're on the second term. So they've been like 6 or 7 years. 6 years. They have had the finance minister, among other things, important posts, and they've been ruling together with the Conservative Party. However, but the effect of their policies hasn't been the most, most effective, because we experienced the largest influx of immigration during their time in office. Yeah. So you could say that they do have a rhetoric that is more restrictive than what they actually do when it comes
that's
to
the same with our ruling party, who are also liberals.
Right.
So what are the demographics like in Norway? Do you have any figures? Does your government keep track?
Yes, they do, and they've been actually pretty good at keeping track. And they've gotten a lot of criticism from the left for keeping track of the demographics. I think even there was discussions to stop recording the demographic, to use ethnic categories in the statistics. Here. Yeah, but anyway, they just came out last year. Last year it came out statistics saying that within 80 or so years, if the trend continues, then Norwegians will become a minority within our own country.
And you have more time than us. Numbers. They say then here we have more time. 2040.
Right, and they said around maybe 2100, something like that.
Yeah, you've got more time then. But you've got a quite small population, right? About 5 million people.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. But we already have 20% of the population.
Yeah.
Are non-Norwegian.
But 20%. Partially of those are probably white immigrants as well, right? Because we have that in the Netherlands, where it's 74% Netherlands, but then it's 86% or so white, because there's a lot of English and Polish migrants and so on.
Yes, and and of course you have like within the that comes from the Schengen area. you have a lot of Swedes that live and work in Oslo. You have a lot of course, there are people from the Netherlands, there are people from other European countries who also reside in Norway. But the largest out of the 20%, the majority of them are Muslims, actually.
Yeah, same here. Different groups of
So
Muslims, like Somalis, Turks,
different,
Moroccans, but collectively, yes.
yes, collectively, yes. So, but they're not a monolithic, like you said, they're not a monolithic group, and they don't necessarily cooperate with each other.
No.
There are groups in Norway which that wants to unite, or there are organizations in Norway that want to unite, that wants to have a unification of the different. Can you hear me? Okay. Now what I'm saying is that there are organizations like a pan-Muslim organization in Norway. These things do exist that wants to unite across their national differences on a basis on religion and a basis of faith. But largely, what we see is that they're not a united group. Like, just because someone is Muslim doesn't mean that they are a one collective united group, even though they form the majority of the non-Western immigrants are Muslim.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that it's not like one monolithic group.
No, I mean, here in the Netherlands, we have the issue whenever there's conflict in Syria and Turkey, the Kurds and the Turks here go to the streets and beat each other up. There's definitely no unity there. But you mentioned
exactly.
the EU, the Schengen zone. What's the attitude in Norway to the EU?
This is interesting. The debate, like we were talking about, like in which direction the debate was moving. And definitely we have seen a shift in a way to the right, where we've seen a shift towards more protectionism. We have seen a shift towards becoming more and more negative to the European Union, and as an extension of that, becoming more negative to like Schengen. But at the same time, what we're experiencing is that there's a polarization in the debate, whereas it's crystallizing. Like, people are digging themselves down into two camps, more or less. So both sides are starting to become more vocal, but the loud, those are who are the most loud at the moment are, of course, the anti-EU or the anti-Schengen. And a lot of this sentiment comes from, I think, a lot of people who also are against these things like Schengen and so on. It's more out of an instinct. They understand that these are tools and vehicles of a globalistic elites. Yeah. And so when they get challenged, they don't necessarily know exactly why and all the details and all the legal details around it. But
it's like a gut sentiment, right?
It's more like a gut sentiment. For example, if you would have some of certainly a lot of people would know how to argue. If you ask me, I would come up with a coherent argument about it. But it's interesting to see that more and more people who are more working class are starting to be negative to on the more of a gut feeling.
What's the most common thing people say against the EU? Like, over here, it's like we're paying for Greece, we're getting all these immigrants, whether they're European or not. Like, they're either Poles, like subverting our wages, or they're immigrants coming here and receiving funds from the government without doing anything. Our pensions are being stolen by inflation and so on. What's like the common talking point in Norway against the EU?
A lot of people do care about independence and sovereignty. That's something that's very important to the Norwegian psyche, I think. So people do care about that. Economically speaking, of course, Norwegians are very protective around our agriculture. We don't want to have open and free trade on agriculture. And that.
Do you have any arable land at all? Isn't it mostly mountains and woods?
We have about 2%, little more. I think it's like 2 or 3% of our land is like arable. And all of that is, of course, most of it, if not everything, is being used for agricultural purposes. And Norway can feed their own population. Like you said, we don't have a huge population. Norway is like almost the size of Germany. Norway is comparable in landmass, the same size of Germany, but we have only 5 million and not 80 million like the Germans do.
Yeah.
So we're able to feed our population. And if we get some re-immigration, that population number can fall down a little bit. Definitely we can. That's most of it. Definitely we could easily feed our population combined with fishing and so on. So people in Norway are very protective when it comes to our agriculture and when it comes to our fishery rights. We don't want to share that.
Yes, that's a great one. We always in the EU, there's always these fights about fishing rights, the Dutch versus the English, and especially.
Yeah, so that's one thing that we are very protective of, and that's just pure protectionism. And then of course those who are very that don't like the mass immigration, that don't like myself, that don't want to see Norway becoming more and more Muslim and so on. Of course, we don't trust the borders of the Schengen. You know, we don't trust the outer borders. So
obviously, because if someone comes into Schengen and they get like 2 million immigrants go to Germany, they get given passports, they can go to Norway.
Correct, and we don't want that. And this is, I think, for those who are against the immigration, that kind of immigration, they would want to pull out of the Schengen because that would give us more sovereignty and the judicial tools in order to protect our borders and to enforce a border control that would prevent people who had either got a passport from a more liberal country like Sweden, for example, and then it's like then according to the Schengen you can't stop them on the border. But this is something, for example, that I would want to have the power to do. I would want Norway to stop people even if they got into the Schengen area. It doesn't mean that automatically you can get into my country. I am against the Schengen. Of course, there's a practical side to it. As a native Norwegian European, it is very practical for me. If I want to go to Holland and let's say this is the airport, I just jump on an airplane. I show my Norwegian passport, and I don't have to apply for a visa. I don't have to have a
of course, everything has downside and upside. So, I mean, the EU has some things it does good, but I mean, there's all these disadvantages.
Yeah, but you have to see that the convenience that my personal and private convenience that I get short term, it's not comparable.
But you know what the difficult thing is? The fact is that convenience has always trumped other arguments. Like, for example, there are reasons to say that, for example, easy transportation like the train and shipping has been disastrous for a lot of things like traditional communities, a sense of purpose, like it's destroyed the idea of a village, a neighborhood. It's nationalized, globalized the economy. For example, without these sorts of advanced transportation, we couldn't cheaply produce our stuff in China and ship it over here. So convenience is often wins over other reasons. But speaking over economic things, does the oil reserve Norway have play a role at all in the discussion with the EU and so on?
Yeah, of course. And I think this is also one of the reasons why Norway is not a full member of the European Union, is that we feel that we can economically, we're safe. So we can afford to be a little bit more on the outside than, for example, other countries who had their economy more integrated and more dependent on the common market than Norway is. Norway is, of course, we have these treaties with the European Union, and if we were to renegotiate or pull out of that treaties, of course, some part of the economy and certain firms and companies could suffer for that. So it's not without economic. It wouldn't be without economic repercussions. But I think in the long term we could make up for it.
Yeah,
And
well, I
Norway
think that
do
the
have.
EU would definitely take steps to avoid Norway from not being associated with them, because there's a very important
Yeah,
factor in the energy security of Europe. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
Russia is a
exactly.
bigger factor, but I mean, Norway is a big deliverer of especially oil, less so gas,
And
to
gas.
the European. Yeah,
Yeah.
but less gas, more oil. Like Svalbard
Well, we
is
have
a
true.
major.
Mm,
Yeah,
Most of our gas goes to the UK actually.
yeah,
So yeah,
exactly.
so we
So
sell a lot to the
Europe,
UK.
you're geopolitically too important for the energy security of Europe to just let you go and do your own thing. So there's also those
Exactly.
concerns.
Yeah, but anyway, getting back to like the political landscape in Norway. So
Hmm.
I think in the general trend is that Norwegians have voted against membership of the in the European Union 2 times, and over the last few years, those who are against the European Union have become more vocal. It used to be people on the left that were lefties, that
Hmm.
were the most. It's interesting. Norway had identitarian lefties back in the 1960s and 1970s. The Socialistic Left Party, for example, was
Yeah.
extremely identitarian, and they were anti-EU and all of these things, and they looked upon the EU as a device of capitalism, which arguably it is. European Union is like a strange marriage between cultural Marxism and globalist capitalism.
It's
But
not a strange
anyway,
marriage. That's the central doctrine of the West: neoliberal
yes,
economics and cultural Marxism policy on the social side.
exactly. So, but anyway, back in the day, the Socialistic Left Party, they were very strongly against it, and they were very identitarian. They
Mm.
would use these very rural kind of clothing, traditional sweaters with the traditional Scandinavian and Norwegian pattern on their knitted, the knitted
Yeah, wasn't there
sweaters
like
that
your Olympic team had sweaters with runes on them, and this was banned or something like that?
yeah, things like that. So back in the day, that this was actually symbology that the left used in Norway, and they used it very effectively against the fight against I have to say, a campaign against in the referendum. Norway had two referendums, one in the 70s, and then we had another one in the 1994. I still remember that. I participated in a protest in 94. I was 7 years old, and I participated in a protest against the European Union that we were.
Sorry, you're breaking up a bit.
So
Yep.
yes, so back in like I said, back in '94, there was a referendum, and Norway voted to stay out of the union. We voted no to membership, and I participated. I was 7 years old, and I remember participating in a protest against it. I was holding one of the signs, and back then it was the left, and we have an organization called No to EU, which arguably has been an active and a strong force in Norway politically on this issue. And they were very effective back in the referendum in 1994, but they were largely socialist. They were
Mm.
largely the center party, which is more like a conservative agrarian party, and then you had the socialistic left party, and they found common ground to and they were even identitarian, I would say, like leftist identitarians. The socialistic left. They have left. This is how they used to be back in the 60s,
Yeah, I
70s,
mean that's
80s.
yeah, that's like
They're not
the
like this
all
anymore.
environmental parties talked about overpopulation, right? That's completely disappeared of the agenda.
Yeah, exactly. Correct. So they used to be more like that. So anyway, but what's happened now is that started to get more of a nationalist, conservative, right wing arguments
Yeah.
against membership in the European Union. This is new. because we already knew all the left-wing arguments against the European Union, and those are fine. I shared a lot of those opinions too. But what is new is that the debate, as it has shifted more towards nationalism and populism, then there are new arguments against the European Union and against membership in the European Union, which are completely new. And it's interesting to see that you have activist groups and interest groups and lobby groups like the No to the EU. They don't know how to handle this type of anti-EU arguments.
Oh, well, usually they just say it's racism over here. They just say, oh, you're just against the EU because they're letting in refugees and letting in immigrants.
Correct. And they have refused to work, to cooperate with this new right groups that are popping up. They flat out refused. I've participated on several of the conferences, and I've tried to find common ground, but they're heavily infiltrated by socialists, basically. So that's another challenge we have to overcome. But anyway, so what's the political landscape in Norway? Well, the political landscape in Norway is that recently this liberal populist party, the progressivist party, that used to be the most right-wing party in mainstream politics in Norway, they broke out of the government recently over the issue of a woman that had joined the ISIS. And now she wanted to come back to Norway because she had a Norwegian, I think she had a Norwegian residence permission or something like this. I'm a little bit unclear on the details. Either she had a passport or she had a residence permit. I'm not quite sure. But anyway, so she wanted, and there was activists that wanted to take her home, and she had.
That's a big discussion over here as well in the Netherlands and in Belgium.
Yes,
about taking ISIS combatants.
Correct, and she wanted home, and things were miserable where she were, and ISIS had imploded and all of that. And she has a child.
Oh, yes.
She got pregnant, and she had a child, and the child was born outside of the Norwegian borders. And of course, left-wing activists wanted to bring her home and wanted to, of course, for the Norwegian government and the state to take care of this child.
Yeah.
Now, the point is that this question actually broke the coalition apart. And I think that's a good thing. Like, she ended up coming back to Norway, and the condition of the child was used as leverage to bring them both home, not home, but both into Norway. And it turned out that there were lies. They were lying about the severity of the condition of the child, and there was a lot of lies that were uncovered after the fact. And this broke the government, broke the coalition, and the Progressivist Party went out. And what I'm hoping is that we'll see a internal shift inside of this Progressivist Party, which like I said, is more of a right.
So can you clarify? Did they leave because they didn't want the ISIS woman to come, or did want to come?
No, they broke the government because they were opposed to bringing her home. And when that happened, they said that, okay, if you bring her in, we're gonna break the coalition, and they did.
So
and I think.
So what's
yes.
now? Is there new elections coming? Is there new coalition?
Instead, the Conservative Party, which has the prime minister, they allied themselves with a purely liberal party and some of the other, like, center right, center liberal, I would say. So not outright socialist, but liberal center party. And now they're running a minority government, and we're having elections that is coming up. We have elections coming up, not this year. Let's see, but next year.
Next year. So is there any parties that are interesting from a nationalist perspective running?
Well, there is the Norwegian Independence Party, which I supported in the local election, and I've been helping to build them up. So since I walked away from and stopped my engagement with Alliansen, there was quite a lot of people whom I had got into contact with, and we decided that we would continue our efforts inside another populist conservative party, which is called the Norwegian Independence Party. So a lot of people went over there, and we'll see. Perhaps they will run in the nationals next year. So I helped them in the locals last year, and now I'm taking a break from party politics, and instead I'm focusing more on culture and meta politics and more civil action and more cultural action. I find it
that's an interesting topic to get into as well, because one of the things I've noticed is Americans are very bad on the ground organizing, informing parties and activist groups and so on, but they're very good online. They're very good at building websites, podcasts, and so on. And we have the opposite in Europe. We have a lot of on-the-ground activity, but online you can barely find anything. So I think the meta-politics angle is we need to, and it's one of the reasons I'm talking to you, for example, is I think it's important for people in Europe, nationalists, to network and promote each other and to have a presence online. So I would encourage, like, you've got lots of American YouTubers, right? Lots of American podcasters, lots of American websites. And the British have it somewhat as well. You can name a few, but there's like one or two Swedes, and then Poland, who knows? Germany, who knows? France, who knows? Netherlands, no one. So that's, I think, a strategy we can follow in terms of meta politics, is doing this YouTube and writing game more online.
Yeah, and not only that, I think we have to go even take it even more serious. We'll have to write books. We have to. People have to make works of art.
Art,
poetry, art, poetry, literature has to be written, and music.
I think you need to. Important. I think literature and books they're a very niche product for a certain demographic. If you actually want to appeal to the masses, you need to do podcasting and music and pop art, like memes or something, for example.
No, I think you have to go deeper than that. I think visual art,
visual and audio,
are, yes, that are beautiful, that are breathtaking, or that are inspiring or very provocative. But I'm not talking memes. I'm talking legitimate works of art that is not political. It's not made. It's not made with politics in mind. But it's there to tell something.
Apolitical works of art that inspire awe in the Kierkegaardian sense require a sort of cultural substrata that have an embodiment of a whole number of ideas. And I think in the current culture, it's very hard to make anything that is artistic, that is apolitical.
No, I think you misunderstand what I'm saying. It's like you shouldn't, because if you try to make it with a political end or political goal in mind, then
but you see, if you want to make something beautiful, that is in itself a political statement in this day and age. If you say I reject modern art,
I agree, but I'm getting to that. So, but it shouldn't be made as a political action. It shouldn't at all. Like it has to be there for the
sake of beauty.
For the sake of beauty, for the aesthetics of it, but also to tell the truth, also to present the world that we live in, and a certain shared experience that is then crystallized and showed to the world that it's a coherent work that reflects what we are experiencing as a common experience, as a whole civilization, or as a nation, or
but there you get into again this cultural pessimism that we're suffering in. I mean, there's not been much great art from any side in the last few decades, and I think the
No, no,
last explicitly like sort of rightist art
I
is like
agree.
futurism.
I agree. I agree, but that's why that art has to be connected, not connected, but what you say, like logged into the roots. It has to have the roots of, for example, that's what I am very passionate about right now, and what I'm involved in. It's a project we call Norwegian Dawn. You know,
Hmm.
it's a bit funny. So it's not nationalistic. It's definitely not political uh, per se, but it has of course political implications. When you make great art, you don't do it when you are in where you are into the culture, where you're into living your heritage, living a genuine life. You're not doing that as a political
Yeah, but
action, but
again,
it has political implications,
yes,
of
because everything
course.
is political today.
Everything has unfortunately become politicized. And that's another weakness, I think, of the modern liberal democracy, is that everything is touched by it.
Yeah.
Everything has to be involved into, like, forced into
Yes, yes, you are not
democracy,
allowed to not be concerned.
exactly. You're not allowed not to just exist outside and just to be
Yeah.
just man, just to be a human being. That's not allowed. You're forced to be a everything is like forced into the realm of politics, even things that don't belong in the realm of politics. And that's a huge problem with the liberal mass democracy. So that's a different discussion, obviously. But that's why I think you have to make something that is outside the realm of politics, certainly outside the realm of activist politics,
Yeah.
certainly outside the realm of party politics, but something that can stand on its own, endure ages, something that can be so powerful and so vital that when opponents see, they can't argue with it, they can't argue against it. It's like their own
But I have a hard
anti-title
time picturing any sort of art that you'd make today. I mean, again, if you would try to make something like a beautiful building today, which would require you to reject modernism, that would be in itself completely made a political statement, and you're doing it out of sort of political reasoning, even if you're not explicitly trying to be political. It's still a political decision to reject modernism in a way. It's very hard to decouple anything from politics. That's what I'm saying.
I agree with you. It's hard to decouple it, but I don't think this shouldn't be the pure, like, at least not, like, let's say, politics in a narrow sense shouldn't be the aim of the artist, because that would be self-defeating. It wouldn't come across as genuine. That's my
No.
point.
But then again, much great art has been at least ideological in a way. Every cathedral is a Christian ideological
Yes, yes.
statement.
Oh, yes, 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 definitely. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be concerned with trying to find truth. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a full philosophical concerns. I'm not saying that you should be concerned with ideas and maybe even ideology as such. But it should rather be an implication. You should walk towards truth first, then touch truth, and then let that art be an expression of that truth that you as an artist have then
Yeah.
expressed, and then let the and that's genuine, and then naturally from there will be political implications from that,
Yeah.
obviously. But
Well,
what I
I think
feel is
what we
that
need to
we're
do is
trying.
try just form a new, like, new romantic art style or something like that. You know, the futurists and the vorticists from the 20s, the right idea in a way. Although I think their art isn't very
Right.
nice.
Right.
So
I definitely agree. Maybe, I don't know, neo-futuristic, some
yeah,
archaeo-futuristic,
archaeo-futurist art, yeah, that sort of thing.
something like that, which has both elements of the technology of the age that we do live in, but presenting a more positive or a more sustainable
Yeah.
vision of the future. At the same
That
time, it
exactly.
has,
One thing we definitely should try to present as
but
the right is a positive view of
our
the
roots,
future.
exactly, and our roots are, or a heroic view of the future, perhaps, and at the same time, as it is, it takes in all these new things that the age that we live in. At the same time, is connected to our roots. It's a continuation, and I think this is the difference between futurism, at least archaeofuturism, and modernism as two models of approaching the future. Is that futurism is a continuation of the
Yeah.
past into the future, whereas modernism is reinventing the world and to break away from the past.
Well, I think
And
modernism
then
is in a sense very, very passive because it lets change happen without having a ideological or doctrinary framework to place technological and social changes in. And that's the difference with, for example, archaeofuturism,
well,
futurism, and so on, is that they do have a philosophy
well,
in
that's
which you
why
can place technological development and could work with
exactly
technology and tradition and society and sort of merge that
correct.
into a functioning whole.
Correct, and I agree with you on that. And the reason why, for example, modernism is passive, and that's why liberalism is spent as a political project is spent, because they implicitly seek the end of history. And
Yeah,
for
yeah, true.
modernism, and for liberalism, that end of history has in a sense occurred for them, right? So that
Yeah, sort of like it's
wouldn't you,
I mean, it's a Hegelian
or at least
philosophy,
they're
right? It is teleological. It does believe in sort of synthesis until you achieve the utopian synthesis of all ideas. And in a sense, I agree that sort of have achieved most of their objectives, and now are sort of looking for other antithesis and thesis to sort of form the ultimate
okay.
utopia, because they still haven't achieved the utopia and they're sort of floundering
Mm,
and wondering, why haven't we
mm,
achieved the utopia? All the obstacles are gone. Our theory should say that we're now sort of done and now there's a
correct.
flat line in paradise where we are, and
but but
it
but
hasn't
but
manifested.
yeah, and that's why I feel they are a bit like, as an ideology, they are exhausted. Like
Yeah.
the steam or the air went out of the balloon, kind of like they're starting to reach,
Well,
I
they've
think
gone into the realm
liberalism
of
will
parody.
yeah.
It's ridiculous, the things that they're fighting against now. At least you could say that it had some ideology at some point and some reasoning behind it in the 19th century, but today, what are they even talking about anymore? Anyway,
Exactly
I
correct.
think we
So
should focus a bit back
anyway,
on Norway. Do you have anything else
yes,
to
let's
add
do.
about like interesting things about Norwegian politics or anything? Otherwise, I can throw in maybe like a question for fun.
Yes, sure. No, what to say about Norwegian politics? No, what I say is a general trend, and perhaps this is true in other European countries, especially when it comes to the nationalist, conservative scene, is that there's a typical tendency, at least in Norway, is that there's a lot of fragmentation
Hmm. Oh yeah.
on the yes, it's a lot of fragmentation, and there's a lot of initiatives that are started, but very often they tend to revolve around like small groups doing their own thing, and then all in all not being too effective. And again, I would refer to my experience and there's a reason why it's like that, and refer to my experience with Alliansen. Was that once it reached a certain limit, or not a limit, but it reached a certain size, then it started to fragmentate, and there's this disagreement, and then you don't necessarily have the means in order to have a transition from a small organization to a medium-sized organization to a large
Yeah, I
organization,
recognize this.
and
Yeah,
then
it's like
and when
it's a thing of
and when
psychology. Like the people in that group feel a sort of insular little sort of mana bund sense, and then when it's time to get serious and like start organizing and building out, and then people kind of they kind of just want their little in group, and they don't really want to
right,
be
right.
adventurous.
So so a lot of the groups have failed. They failed this transition,
Yeah.
and largely because of the unwillingness of either one significant person in that group or a number of persons. They're unwilling to make those changes. They're unwilling to, so they fail making these transitions. But I also think that the reason for that is that you don't have a proper, you don't necessarily have a proper framework. You don't have the foundation. You don't have the social platform culture foundation in order to unify larger groups around.
Yeah.
And that's why people very often splinter off. Or
well, it's also a question of experience. It's like, if you put it in military terms, we've got a lot of people who are capable of being platoon level commanders, like little groups. But there's no one with like general staff competency. No one is capable of,
no,
or even like in their mind, creating or building an organization that has actual large scale political influence. And that has a lot to do with the fact that most of these organizations throughout Europe that are starting out now are young men trying to learn everything through like failure and retrying, and so
yeah,
people are reinventing the wheel constantly, and there's no
yeah.
more experienced leaders to give us guidance because most of the nationalist parties from the past are gone, and or there was no continuity, or for many reasons that there's basically no cadre of more experienced political.
Right. It's like you have to go through a painful time with trial and error,
Yeah.
until you hit the formula. So I'm not saying it's a waste of time. It certainly isn't. But it's like a lot of the initiatives that have popped up, a lot of them will die. Maybe 1 out of 100 is
Yeah.
successful.
Yeah.
But it's not like, so that's what I'm saying. Like, even if Alliansen failed as a political experiment, or a political, how to say, initiative. It failed as a political initiative. What came out of that is very valuable. All the connections,
experience. Experience is valuable. The networking.
My personal experience. I've grown a lot as a person from participating in that. I've learned a lot. It's a lot of things. It's a lot of mistakes that we made that I'll never not do again if I get involved again. So these are experiences that I got personally, but also it gathered, dozens and dozens of young men who now, like, you could say that out of the ashes from that organization, out of that failure, you gathered like maybe 100 young men that never knew about each other before.
Yeah.
Now suddenly have like this informal, underground, private camaraderie. They know each other. They know each other's names. They trust each other, and they have all started going into new initiatives. They have started
have
put
this
their
exact
energy
experience.
into stuff.
Yes.
And out of that came a lot of other new initiatives, which aren't strictly necessarily political in the sense like a political party initiative.
Yeah, they're more political, right? Yeah.
So it was very turbulent. It was a lot of, you could say, mistakes were made in that political party, and of course there was a lot of. I'm not going to go too much into that, but something, it wasn't completely wasted. Rather the opposite. Something very valuable was created.
Let me phrase it this way.
Born.
Without traditions, without anyone passing on knowledge, every generation has to find out the wheel again, and that's what we're doing because we don't have a right-wing political tradition.
That's exactly what we're doing, and one of the experiences I've learned is that it's very important that you have to be so strict with what the people you allow into your group.
Yes.
And so it's like, one thing is the people you allow into your group, and the other thing is that those who are people, because a lot of crazy gets attracted to an outsider movement. It goes without saying, because if you're on the
it's
there's a
marginal.
reason
It
why.
attracts marginal figures, right?
Exactly. So there are two things I learned from that. People who are marginal, people who are like, for a reason, either because of some mental issues or because of some other reasons, you just have to weed them out. They cannot
can't be accepted.
They cannot be accepted. The best, they shouldn't be a part of the group. And if there's a person who's a little bit like 50-50, they can never hold any sense of leadership positions or positions of trust. It's so important. This is number one. You have to. It's better to kick out one guy too much than to have one that should have been kicked out, but you didn't do it. So
Depends
this
on
is
the
one
level
thing.
of what you're looking for to recruit people for. If
Of
you're just
course.
going to employ, if you have space in your organization to just employ them as like people to go flyering or gathering signatures, then you can use them. If you're an elite little metapolitical think tank, then you've got no use for them, of course.
Well, at least when you are small and vulnerable, you cannot allow. You have to have a very high standard. This is number one. And the number two is that the people who are more serious, people who come across as, very, I don't have the right word for it, but
Competent?
they competent, they dress nice, they have a good job.
Yes, I gave a speech about
These
this
things.
recently, actually. That those people are the people you need to be the public face of your party, and they're the ones who have
Yeah.
the most to lose. Therefore, they're the most afraid to commit.
Correct. But the other thing is that you have to then you have to build a culture around courage, and to really have to work on that part of when it comes to being brave, courage to strongly, or to build a culture where it's you promote, where you feel either you feel because you have such a strong support from the group, or you give a lot of, how to say, recognition to the people that
Well, I think you have to
dare to.
have incentives, and one of the incentives you
Yeah.
can offer is just a logical explanation that, well, you can maybe protect your job now, but if we're a minority in our own country, what good does that do for you in your old age, or do for your children or grandchildren? And at the same time, you can, if you have the ability, the best way is to have enough organizational structure that you can have a few people who can afford to lose their jobs, and you can catch that by having your own job networks or financial means to support them. Of course, that requires a lot more organization than any nationalist group has at the moment, except political parties.
Right. So that's so definitely these are the two things that I've learned, that you have to promote, you have to be brave, and those that are more, how to say, competent people with good jobs and so on. Those, of course, you have to promote them, but you have to encourage that courage, so to speak. And then you have to kick out people who are just
marginal
or
marginal,
and marginal and these kind of things. So don't be desperate for a member to convert people into your organization.
I think we've had very similar experiences in setting up organizations. So I'd leave it there, and I can cut this if you want at the end, but I think it'd be funny for the audience to have a Norwegian perspective on this, and that is to discuss Varg and to hear what sort of Breivik, I think maybe as a warning too, like what happened in Norway with Breivik in the nationalist scene. And I can cut this if you don't want to discuss it.
No, I think this is still a very obviously a very sensitive topic, and it's a national trauma, really.
Yeah.
And I remember that day very well. I was very close to the epicenter where the bomb went off. I was maybe 100 and I was like 2 streets or a what do you call it, a block, one block away from the epicenter of the explosion. and a lot of, so this is something that I remember that day very well, and this is something that has really gone into the, I say, trauma into the national psyche of Norway.
Well, I think it's interesting to use it maybe as a warning, because we were discussing marginal people, and you've got this phenomenon now of people out of desperation committing crazy terror attacks, which of course disavow and don't approve of. But maybe it's interesting to hear like what happened to nationalist politics after Breivik, how that impacted it.
Yes, and I would say that this is like it was an appalling, terrible thing that happened that day, and what it did, the consequences was that Norwegian, you could say, conservative right-wing politics were put back maybe 10 years. It was so harmful. It was extremely harmful to the right-wing movement and movements like that in Norway, because now everyone that wants to say something that slightly resembles what this terrorist did, now they want to use it to associate you and like your opinions and your ideas with him. So it's been extremely harmful.
Yeah, you're just giving the enemy a stick to beat you with by doing things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And what he did was reprehensible, and it doesn't even make it. For me, it's like I'm looking at that as a Norwegian, and it just doesn't make any sense. Like he didn't achieve anything politically, and at the same time you attack innocent, kill underaged persons at the summer camp. It's just so crazy. It's just so appalling that and I'm thinking about it like
and it's not really like his argument was that these were the future of the left. But I have a background. When I was 16, I was a leftist as well. I was a very radical communist.
Yeah,
I think a lot of nationalists actually have a background in leftist politics. So you can't like condemn someone for like that moment. You can't decide, well, they're lost forever and it's now a moral thing to kill them.
No. A 16-year-old boy or girl going to certain events may not even know what they think politically. They're going there because it's social, because it's fun. They it's summer holiday. Maybe they get a girlfriend or boyfriend at the camp. And there's all kinds of like, and I have lots of friends now that used to be, that they were socialist liberals when they were teenagers, and now they are coming more and more to the traditional and more the conservative right wing
exactly.
point of view. So it's like when you're young, you're naive, you would be at that camp not because you're ideologically committed.
I mean, 16-year-olds, they follow what they're taught in school. And these people, the kids that were killed, were children of political party members. So they just followed the ideology of their parents. I mean, these were not hardened ideologues.
Obviously not. And still, it's just wrong to it's just so appalling and wrong to go and kill people like that.
Yes, exactly.
So what he did is it's something in a way. It also united Norway.
Sorry, you're breaking up quite badly. Give it a moment, maybe.
Yeah. So, but it was also something that Norway is a shared trauma. I think all Norwegians can, in a way, relate to, and that everyone that is in their mind appalled by what happened that day. But what it has done, the political outcome effect of it, is that suddenly it's now legitimate for the secret services to
investigate you. Yeah, that happened to Greg Johnson when I went to speak there.
Right, and you think you have a lot of people who are nationalistically oriented are now are suffering, and they're losing their legal rights of being fined. so to speak, like a right of privacy.
Exactly, because here in the Netherlands, actually, we kind of have the moral high ground in that sense. Whenever people say, "Oh, the right-wing terrorism, oh, dangerous," and so on, we can say, "Well, there hasn't been a right-wing terrorist attack in the Netherlands since about the Second World War, but we can list all of these Antifa terror attacks, and we can list the murder of Pim Fortuyn and so on, and we can just always say it's absolute nonsense to consider the right-wing a threat." But as soon as someone would like do something like private, you lose that argument, and you do basically become a target for police and security services.
Yeah, so it's extremely counterproductive, and of course our globalist opponents, our adversaries, they are using this cynically. They're using it as cynically, and they're using it for what it's worth to smear and to surveillance and to crack down on legal activities that the right-wing groups and nationalist organizations are doing.
And that consequently intimidates those competent people who you want to join your organization to not join your organization.
Exactly. So it's the most counterproductive thing that has happened in Norwegian. It's like completely counterproductive, and if towards his own stated goals, right? What his actions are, they were counterproductive to his
the
own
extreme.
Stated.
So I think we can conclude here by saying, don't commit terrorism. Go paint. Go do art.
Yes, that's my point. Exactly. Go and do art. Go and write a book. Go and write an amazing poem. Or exactly. Go make a sculpture.
Okay. We'll leave it there then. Don't commit terrorism. Go make art. Thank you, Björn, for joining me. Maybe we'll do another podcast in the future. Hopefully, we'll have a better connection then.
Hopefully, yeah. And yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.